Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come here. And really delighted to come and talk about interdisciplinary research, because I think it's time has come in this area. And it's very exciting to talk to people who are also interested in this space. Thank you for the introduction, Ian. As Ian said, I'm not a mathematician, although I live in a maths department, so interdisciplinary thing number one. I'm part of the information security group at Royal Holloway that's probably best known for its cryptographic work. It was a group that was founded to mathematicians, to computer scientists. And although I've known the group for about 20 years, I came on board 4 years ago to work in security management, traditional security management. I did do a PhD nominally in computer science, although I retrained during that PhD and wound up with a PhD that's actually in organizational studies. And I think the difficulty that people had in placing my PhD and who to supervise it shows how information security as a field is evolving in terms of its interdisciplinarity. And I think it's only now, with the type of projects that Ian's been on, this type of project, that we're beginning to see a differentiation between different types of social science, between the role of humanities, as well as different hues of computer science, as well as maths in this group. So it's actually a very exciting time, I think, to be in this space. What I want to talk about today is a project called Visualization and Other Methods of Expression, or VOE. It was a project that was set up to look at how people articulate privacy concerns. That was its main thing. And its core research question was, what does privacy feel, sound, and look like? That was our core question. And the core question was because in all the discussions that were ongoing around privacy, none of the researchers really had a good feel for what was the shape of privacy, what was privacy as a concept. And we wanted to explore that. And the funders wanted us to explore that, but not with the traditional research groups that typically would respond, students, people who were confident talking about the internet, but so-called hard-to-reach communities that wouldn't typically come forward and engage. And what I want to talk about today is the methods of engagement, how our research approach evolved into a very different research approach at the end of the project to how we had it at the start. So it's a project that over the course of 3.5 years, because we did wind up going in the end for 3.5 years, moved from being a very traditional interdisciplinary project with some computer science, some social science in the form of social psychology and sociology, into a project that was led, in fact, by artists in the end. If we think about the objectives of the project, we were a 5-party consortium. So we were 3 academic institutions. University of Salford led us as sociologists. Cranfield, social psychologists. Information security group were kind of the makers, the engineers, the systems designers. And then importantly, we had Sunderland City Council as our practitioner faction. Sunderland, for those of you that don't know it, is up on the northeast of England, just below Newcastle, in between Newcastle and Sunderland and Durham. It has been evangelists in digitising public services since the mid-1980s, where digitising, that view has changed over the time that they've been doing it, but basically looks at web delivery, smartphone delivery, looks at bringing different service providers together, grouping them together on different platforms, and reaching what is a very wide and very diverse area. Sunderland has a city, has a very strong urban landscape, and goes right out into the coal fields, where in fact my mother's from, which is a lot of different coal mining villages around the edge of Sunderland. Large amount of unemployment, shipbuilding originally, textiles, mining, all of which are industries that have since finished. Now major employers include Nissan, the car factory, and call centres are also very strong up in the northeast. And we also had Consult Hyperion, who were a small public forum that are important in terms of lobbying and in terms of policy positioning. Funded, as we said, by Technology Strategy Board, EPSRC and ESRC. And over time, since the end of year one, and I'll explain how we got this, we actually wound up with a clown on staff. This is Freya Stang. Freya Stang has been hugely important in helping us bring together the different disciplines that were in the project. And here's Freya's partner in crime, Karina Townsend, who wound up being very important for us in terms of helping us go out and engage with communities that typically wouldn't feel comfortable coming into the more traditional methods of focus groups, interviews and surveys. This is Karina in Middlesbrough railway station, where we were for about 3 days. Okay, so the goal of the project, we settled on our goal as designing privacy awareness tools. Not just technological tools, although a lot of what you see in the brochure is in fact technological tools, but also social tools, what we would call post-digital tools, so games. We deal with a certain amount of music as well. Tools, techniques that could be used in community settings to promote discussion about online disclosure behaviours. And what was important for us wasn't just to develop the tools. Of course, that would be typically for the computer science end of the equation. It was about developing tools, making things. But what was important was for us to also develop explanatory power. So we worked closely with the sociologists to develop an understanding for what tools would work best when, why certain tools worked in certain areas and not in others, why the effects were different, and also how to personalize and tweak the tools in different scenarios. So for us, working closely on the social science side was particularly important so that we were able to personalize and adapt the tools. Very much where we were coming from as a project was looking at a citizen-centric approach. We moved to a co-creative approach, and we'll talk about that towards the end. Very much set on not developing solutions, but developing interventions, tools that could be used in different settings for different effects. And very much looking at not giving empowerment, because I don't think you can give empowerment. I think that's not the right way to position it. But creating environments in which people felt able that they could start to control and make decisions about what sort of information they disclosed and when. And also understanding the limitations in given situations. The context for us is not the typical context of Amazon or online purchasing, but actually online public service delivery. So we had to deal with a very broad set of demographics. Right from the start, we had to think about varying levels of digital and visual literacy. We had to think about a number of different, what we call communities, so groups of participants, service users, non-users. Non-users turned out to be incredibly important to us. So people who don't directly use the services, but individuals who influence the use of those services. So for example, in the family setting, grandmothers turned out to be extremely important, bearing in mind that in the groups that we work with, grandmothers are my age, right? So we're not talking about the stereotypical image of granny who's in her 80s and goes to bingo. We're talking about grannies who are in their mid-40s. And that's a really important point, because this understanding those users, those roles, they turned out, the non-users who weren't ever going to become Facebook users, turned out to be really important consumers of the VOAM tools. Service providers. We're service providers. We're thinking about the local council setting. We're thinking about local government service delivery. So we're thinking about social services. We're thinking about third sector organisations that are delivering information. We're thinking about children's services. We're thinking about education services. That's what we're thinking about when we think about service providers. And the technical providers that support those, and which we counter here as third parties. So a very complex landscape that we have to engage with. We were tasked with situating our field work, with contextualising the debate. So to start off with, we had this massive space to play in, which quite frankly was rather intimidating. So we started to think about the different groupings, and we saw them group in terms of age. So we thought about an age spectrum. We thought about education. We thought about formal education, schools, colleges, But we also had to think about informal education. So we had to think about youth work, for example. NEETs, not in employment, education and training. So we had to think about that demographic that had largely fallen off the radar. And when we started the project, those were NEETs that probably fell off the radar around about 9, 10, 11, and were only really visible to us through informal education. Young parents was another community that we worked with. So we first of all split by age, we split by education, we split by connection points into the community. And that's how we started to work. Also, what's important to understand, over a 3.5-year project, we saw big changes in that landscape. Not least of all, the shift in the NEET demographics. So originally we would be talking about people who were traditionally NEET, who'd gone off the radar around about 9, 10, 11. And then we started to see, as employment opportunities, education, change in benefits, we started to see a lot of people who were NEETs by virtue of the fact they couldn't find training courses, they couldn't find sixth form colleges. So people who wouldn't traditionally fallen into that category, but now were struggling to find a place. And the type of interventions that we found, you can find them on the website. It's a music video that Cranfield developed, short stories. We did short stories right from the word go. We worked with some writers' circles, and they came up with a whole range of stories. Game. The game, you can download the game. You can actually even make the game yourself. We do a flat pack version. And that game... Have you played it already?
I played it. It's great, yeah.
Cool. So flat pack version, and we had a great time finding out what works and also what doesn't with the game. And we also went to a games hack, and I think it was Nottingham. See the results there, where we took the game's principles and found how different games designers would actually play and develop the game. So we stress tested these social interventions. And then my group was responsible for looking at design principles for online services, developing some maps of information flows and experimenting with those maps, finding out how those maps worked with varying levels of digital literacy, and also communication tools. And we learned a lot about what doesn't work. We crashed and burned on the communication tools side, but learned a lot from crashing and burning in terms of where people are prepared to ask questions of service providers, why they're prepared to ask it in certain, and who they're prepared to ask it of. So we learnt a lot in that area. Probably the most successful intervention was the cartographies, and the design principles are now getting some interesting traction in local government space. And here's an example. You can find quite a few on the website, but here's an example of, here are 3 interventions. We mocked up an online service, Your Local Council. This is about buying, about getting an access card. Here we have an inquiry function about what happens to information. That didn't work for some interesting reasons. Cartographies, which we developed in lots of different ways, is a very early version. And also a community discussion page. And again, we discovered ways in which we can make that sort of work better than it did in this particular version. And we've got some case studies ongoing still with that, even though the project's finished. What's the value of the proposition? What are we really? Well, the value of the proposition, we discovered, depends very much on the ethos of the service. For a lot of service providers, and we did a lot of work with service providers as well, for some service providers, it's just descriptive power. It's a way of replacing aspects of the privacy statement, and that's all it is. For some service providers, it's more than that. They create an environment in which it's not just descriptive power, but also a means of engagement to communicate about the service, to build up trust in the brand, to allow challenge, to sort of promote a dialogue. For some, although we'll have to see whether it ever gets implemented, it's about empowerment, it's about challenging. It's about the ability to challenge service providers and for service providers to be able to demonstrate, or not as the case may be, their own values around information management. Okay, so let's have a look at the research design. How did we achieve this? So the overall approach didn't really change. The overall approach was mediated through gatekeepers. Every time we engaged with one of those community segments, we found an individual that had access to that particular segment We worked closely originally only with the gatekeepers in the early days to engage with the gatekeepers to find out what the issues were, the method of engagement is going to work best, the location, the types of issues that are key here. Then, as we built up relationship with the gatekeepers, we built up relationships with the groups, started to work directly with the communities themselves to find out what kind of method of engagement would work best. And then we worked with a range of methods. Traditionally, questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, found quite a serious limitation with that, which stopped us achieving our mission to really get into some of the harder to reach communities. I had to rethink after the end of year one. And we worked across a range of demographics. It's very much, in the early days particularly, a very broad set. This isn't Sunderland, it's New York, but I like the picture. But the point is that we worked very much in a situation. We burnt up a lot of travel money. So God love TSB. I was saying to Ian beforehand, God bless TSB for giving us such a huge travel grant, because it's not cheap going from Oxford to Sunderland. And we managed to spend a lot of time actually physically in the place, and we learnt a lot about that. Our efforts to do engagement online and to collect data online were not nearly as successful. So we learnt the hard way that, in fact, in the end, we got better data by really entrenching. And that's, of course, something that the sociologists taught us. I put this in here, given the focus of the group. We worked across all three aspects of privacy. So these are the traditional ways in which privacy is separated. And we worked across all three ways. We can't work with... We never use the word privacy, actually, when we engage with people. That doesn't really work. We talked about how they engage with technologies. We talked about why they engage with technologies. And what comes up is a whole range across here with the very blurred boundaries. And then we worked, obviously, from an analytical perspective to see how this, we use various frames. So we work very much by focusing on technology engagement in situation, and the types of information that's disclosed. Well, there were three things we wanted to know, and that remained constant throughout the project. Technology engagement, the type of information that's disclosed, concerns that people have, and their levels of awareness. And then we looked at the relationship between the three. And what was interesting for us is that there was no literature that we could really find that sort of talked about how those concerns are expressed. And that was a real issue for us, was building up a language of expression. Yes, go ahead.
Lizzie, I just wondered if I could go back to
yes.
When you said that talking about privacy to users directly didn't work.
Yeah.
Could you just say why?
Why? Okay, for excellent, thank you. For this reason, was that there was no language. So as soon as we got into talking about privacy, there's a bigger restriction on what they're going to say. So what they start to mimic was what happened in the press. So you could almost word for word sort of mimic it that way. If we did it where we stopped talking about privacy and we just talked about technology engagement and we explored different types of technology engagement, a much broader set of these features come out.
Would you sort of perhaps express certain things that can go wrong with privacy online?
Yes.
Actually then illustrate that. But you wouldn't want to associate that with the word privacy?
No, because for privacy has different meanings for different people. Also, and this gets really interesting, when we worked, we worked across, I worked a lot up in Sunderland, but we had three different teams and they worked in Salford, they worked across the southeast. So it means different things in different places. But when I'm working up in somewhere like West Sunderland, I'm working with a community that typically has low social mobility, typically has lived in the same area cheek by jowl with people that they're actually Facebooking with. So privacy means a different thing, and in fact, for some people, it doesn't even register. But what was interesting is when we started to prod this, and let's just sort of push this a little bit further. So there's this feeling that everybody knows everybody else, that you're in this tight circle. So and you don't typically, not always, it really depends on the individual, but not necessarily a big amount of engaging with people from outside that circle. But then you start to prod who might be within that circle where there might be issues. Loan sharks, would come up as a possibility. The neighbour who might pick up that you're working on the black and might potentially disclose. And so some very interesting points come up around what you disclose, what you don't disclose. That if I go on about privacy, yeah, does that make sense? So actually, it is and so also the other problem was actually that researchers also would load the questions. So that's why we kept it broad and saw what emerged. So very much an inductive approach. Good. All right. So yeah. So information privacy consent. Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things that we had to develop was a language about concern, and that's where the artists came in to start off with. That's where we first got involved with the artists. Of course, we knew about concern trajectory, and in fact, our early research mimicked this almost beautifully. And then the question became how we move beyond there. The other thing that we learnt early on was, and this is something the sociologists really clearly pointed out to us, is that we needed to understand it in situation. We need to understand the social relationships, the context in which these relationships were operating. So we need to understand as much about the offline face-to-face environment as we did about the online environment. So it really is an entangled mesh, and we couldn't look at one without the other. If we looked at one without the other, we didn't really get what was happening, because if we looked at offline relationships without looking at ICT mediation, we misunderstood a lot of what sort of information was being shared, and equally back the other way. So how do we start off? So we started off, we thought, okay, massive space, what are we going to do? And we did, I guess, what most people would do in our environment. We set up a baseline survey. We worked together with UK Online. UK Online were absolutely fabulous for us. They already have a citizen panel. We developed, we used a number of different scales, one of which is very familiar, I think, to all of you here, the IU-IPC scale. And we did everything that we should do. And at the same time, the sociologists went out and they ran focus groups and they ran interviews. And we got what you would have expected. We can play around with the numbers, but I don't think the numbers are really important here. It's a general pattern. So we got the standard set of responses in terms of concerns. We got the standard set of responses in terms of control of information. And this survey is downloadable from the website. Standard sort of set of responses around awareness. And we got a number of patterns of influences. Age was a strong pattern of influence. The older you are, the more concerned you are. Split between males and females. Level of internet experience greatly adjusted your level of concern, as did levels of education. However, whilst our survey was very clear-cut, our focus groups and interviews weren't. And we had a real challenge, because the interviews and focus groups weren't giving us the gender split at all. The gender split as well in terms of types of controls that we use, information protection practices, they weren't giving us a split on that either. So that posed a wee bit of a problem. Internet experience, yes, that was important, but again, not as clear cut. Age, yes, age was fairly consistent. And we became particularly interested in privacy protection practices. So this is the classic Buchanan, the common sense steps and technical protection of privacy, because what came out very, very strongly that didn't come out in the survey was the breadth of general caution practices and how they weren't just a female activity. It was clear that males also undertook general caution. So we began to really push and probe on that area. And again, whilst the survey talked about a gender split, we didn't see the same thing face to face. So field work, much broader range. We saw also in the field work the importance of offline recommender systems, what was being said about services in the community. And the use of technical protection measures, this real influence about who, this is where non-users come in, who are actually setting up technical protection measures, how those are communicated, that there was a whole family relationship going on here that, again, we couldn't flush out from the survey, so we wanted to press harder. Yes, of course, we came up with paradoxes in the survey, but our fieldwork urged caution on this side, so we wanted to find out more. So we had this interesting situation where on the one hand, our fieldwork demonstrated this clear split, concern on the one side, but wanting to reach out and communicate on the other. And we couldn't square it away neatly with just explaining it through paradoxes. We wanted to know why the different choices were being made. We wanted to understand how people's privacy journey was ongoing. It wasn't just a start, you didn't just wind up in a particular set of practices, how that was ongoing. We wanted to understand why you would foreground and background privacy concerns at different times. And we wanted to understand the choice of foregrounding and what awareness and lack of awareness actually meant. And we weren't really getting traction on those questions in interviews and focus groups, partly because of the point that was raised earlier around how do you have that conversation. And we weren't really getting traction either in the surveys. And we tried to break down the survey into sub-questions, and that just didn't work at all. So our question became, how do we find out more about these choices? How do we break down the interviews, focus groups, surveys where we're getting expected practice? How do we shake that up and get further? And how do we understand the links between concerns and privacy awareness? How do we understand that? And we weren't breaking into what we call the liminal communities, the communities right out on the edge. Because even when we ran focus groups in community centres, we were getting the usual suspects come and engage who had views. So how are we going to do that? And we were struggling with that one at the end of the first year. And quite by chance as it happened, we were very lucky and we got a bursary from ESRC to do Festival of Social Science. We had this set of disparate results. We thought, how are we going to present this cohesively? And I knew Freya from a long time ago. And we talked and she said, okay, well, why don't we write a play? Why don't we write a play about the results? Why don't we present the results in play format? And why don't we take that play back to the participants? So we did. And that was a really interesting experience for us because it was the first time where we had different segments together. We actually had families turning up because it was a family day out and they came to the theatre. They had methods of engagement whereby they could use electronic voting paddles to select different outcomes from the play, so different outcomes to privacy choices. And then they got to talk about why they'd made those choices and what they thought were the effects of those outcomes. And what we discovered was that we started to get a much richer set of responses. And we also got family members arguing with each other. That was quite an interesting experience where they would disagree with the interpretation. And we started to see much more of a dialogue going on. And we thought, okay, this is interesting. Perhaps we can push this. Perhaps we can engage with this a bit more. So we started to evolve our engagement. So we went from, so in order to work with, so as we said, we work with a broad demographic, so a whole range of service providers, whole range of communities. And we started to move from traditional social research methods that are still important, still gave us some traction, but started to move more towards user-centric design methods. So we started to develop probes, technical probes, that went out into communities and got people to engage with the technology, to find out more about how they would engage, why they would engage, thinking out loud, not asking them to simulate what they do in real life, but got them to think and reflect on their practices. And we moved from there into participatory methods in order to develop a yet more inclusive approach. So the challenges we had with the social research approach was that, yes, it's great for comparing against existing baselines. It was great because we're on familiar territory. Both participants and researchers knew what they were doing. It was all quite comfortable. And we got very solid patterns of practice. But it was difficult to move beyond the unknown. It was difficult to find the links, what was happening underneath. We had a big language barrier. And technology we found is quite a passive actor. People were reflecting back on their technology use and remembering their technology use in a way that perhaps wasn't as accurate or as featured. as it was when we started to use the user-centric approach, and people started to have a much richer expression of the patterns they used. So we moved in the second year to a user-centric design approach. We derived the requirements from the technical probes, from the interviews, from the focus groups that we'd done. We developed probes, and therefore people engaged with technology. So it was technology, participants, and researchers in the space at the same time. We did a similar approach with service providers and found service providers reacted to this approach much better. The doors were shut on us right from the early days from service providers. They didn't want to talk about us at all. They didn't want to talk about privacy awareness at all. We then started to have bits of what we call digital sticky back plastic. We'd go in, we'd have a session in an evening with a series of service providers, and they would prod and poke the probes till the cows came home. They were really happy to talk about the probes. And as a result, we found out a lot more about how they protect personal information, what their attitudes are to raising awareness within their service user community. So user-centric design in this way, using probes to further elicit requirements for the awareness tools, were useful. But we had a problem in the sense that we'd have 3 or 4 different probes. We'd ask people what they thought. It was very much affirmative design. Do you like that? Yes, no. People didn't really envision what they might, if they didn't want any of the 4 options, or they wanted it completely differently. It was really difficult for them to move beyond the 4 options that we'd given them. The language barrier still existed because we weren't expressing in our probes, we weren't expressing the ways in which people conceptualized information and information flows. And actually the participants became sometimes quite passive. They just would do what we asked of them. They didn't necessarily move beyond that. The other problem that we had with user-centric design approach in this sense is that we also disturbed the situation. For many of our participants, they would use technologies in a family setting with different family members taking different roles. Perhaps granddaughters would set up social networking rules and controls, for example. Perhaps the partner of mother or grandmother would set up the access, the router, for example. Perhaps the 12-year-old son was doing the online banking. And we didn't see any of that come out in this situation, not really. Probably because the types of people who feel confident enough to do this type of engagement weren't in that bracket. Also because we weren't creating an environment in which those types of things naturally bubbled up. So we were aware that we'd moved on. We'd begun to understand more. And we published a paper on different confidence practices. You download that from the website. But we still hadn't really got out into that liminal space. So in the last 18 months, we focused more on participatory engagement approaches. Participatory engagement is where right from the start we would co-design how we design the probes together with participants. We would make those probes together with the participants. And in the process of the making, people would tell us their stories. So we started off with collage. Collage was a very big set of co-design tools, which is very low digital, but nevertheless works very well. We've got about 40 foot, I think, of collage now back at the office that we're working on. We started to make collage, first of all, in Middlesbrough railway station, where we set up for another ESRC Festival of Social Science activity, where in Middlesbrough railway station we would use performance artists to engage with participants to see who would want to talk about their online experiences, what they keep secret online, and what they hunt online. So we had the 2 parts. There were 4 different activities, of which they chose 2 or more if they wanted to, but a minimum of 2. They might draw their feelings about being online and about how to keep things secret online. They might go and speak to Karina and tell stories about their secrets online and the secret things they did online. So we're working out what we're going to do with that, because yes, it won't work directly in a collage. We also had 4 questions. We had 4 research questions that people could answer on bits of card. And they could also have photographs taken, because we have to cope with different levels of literacy, different levels of engagement. And we built up a collage. And there was a fascinating experience, probably the best thing that we did, because we weren't working through gatekeepers. We were working directly with members of the public. We've got a very broad range. The reward or the return for taking part in it was to get a £5 voucher for the Station Cafe, and the Station Cafe, very good food, had hot food. So we got quite a big homeless contingent on the one hand. We became quite popular, particularly on day 2. But also we were popular with families who were out shopping, popular with individual travellers. A lot of people who took part didn't actually take the voucher. They were just happy to answer questions as they went through. And we got a really interesting range of responses of questions, and a really interesting range of views as to what was secret online, what they wanted to hunt online. And we developed that process, and we used that in a number of different colleges across Sunderland and Durham. And we worked in particular community areas. That turned out to be an incredibly good way to find out what the under 9s do with Facebook online. And that was really, really interesting. Equally, we used that approach to find out what the over 55s do online in terms of that in a particular community. So that turned out to be a really, really strong way. We're now using this approach in a follow-on project with prisoners' families to build a textile piece of artwork about their journey and about information barriers and challenges to the prison visiting journey. And then we'll use that to go inside prison to talk with family members about how they view that process. So it's turned out to be a very powerful way to do this. Type of engagement. We've moved on from collages. We then got into play design, song design. That was something that Cranfield did, again with a participatory approach. And over the 3.5 years, we began to be able to include much broader sections of the community. There we are at Middlesbrough Railway Station. It's Andy, who's a performance artist, and there somebody's writing down some of the answers to the questions.
Do you
yes.
have pictures of the collages to show us?
Yes, I do at the end. Yes.
Just to give us context.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, right at the end, we have it. So the lessons learned, I think this is really kind of the summary of where I'm coming from with this, is that we learned all the way through this journey where we got to, and if we got to do the project all over again, this is kind of the 3 points that we'd start from, is that there is a real tension in control, and that researchers, we need to as researchers really let go of the control. The groups themselves need to find a level at which they're comfortable in terms of engaging. And that might not be sat in front of a computer doing the lab experiment that we want to do. It might be actually doing a bit of sticking and making. One of the hardest groups to reach, in fact, were mothers. Mothers on low income, because they were so stressed and fraught trying to balance everything, that coming in and then doing a lab experiment, okay, we might pay them and that's great, but then they cited the biggest reason for information disclosure for them was time pressure, was trying to deal with getting the tea ready, sorting out homework. They would just get on with it. So if we put them in a lab, we took away the kids, we gave them a cup of coffee, we gave them peace and quiet, their responses are going to be quite different. So it's finding that level that they're really letting, if you're going to be in there for the long haul, letting that group find the level at which they want to work, and then adjusting how we do the research and how we do data collection to fit that situation. The nuances of situation. In the prisoners' families work that I'm doing now, I've got 2 very, very different approaches for 2 very different situations. On the one hand, we're doing, which again was chosen by the families, they're doing textile collage making with people who are, they're not ex-offenders, they're kind of probably in between visits, I would say. How they work is actually they've come up with the approach, they want to do puzzle design, and they're doing puzzle design as a means to talking about their stories. And segmentation, really important to keep segmenting and re-segmenting the groups. We started off with these horribly broad groups, and to really break it down, and each iteration to break down the group still further, to really understand how people who differentiate themselves in different ways, not seeing them as one amorphous lump in a particular age demographic or seeing them in a particular economic brand, but actually breaking it down further and further so that we get to understand how different subgroups work together. So those are the lessons that we came away with, and certainly how we think about design now going forward. That's greatly influenced subsequent projects that we work on. Where to next? So although the project itself is finished, we have a number of ongoing projects. Sunderland City Council is taking the service design principles and moving them, using them with a number of different portals, including their child poverty portal, which is interesting. We're looking at different ways, also thinking about service users as producers, not just as consumers. We're looking at one of the big uses of the cartographies was information values, and we're working with a charity for runaway children called Safe at Last to produce different maps that represent information value handling from those third parties. And we're also working, supporting a community that's developing a support network for community action, which comes back to the more traditional issues of information disclosure that we talked about before. And we're ongoing evaluation. This is a long haul for evaluating how the game and the music video develop. And here's our collage, right? So that's Freya. This is part of the collage that we built in Middlesbrough. What was fascinating about working in Middlesbrough was that we had this collage up overnight in the underpass. And we were fully expecting it to be dismantled when we came back the following day. That we kind of expected that to happen. And what was fascinating to us was that we'd accidentally left a table out. We subsequently had a laptop, not that it was an obsolete laptop. We had that removed by various people. But none of the artwork, none of the posters were actually touched, which I think is really, really interesting. We're now producing a digital version which mashes together the Sunderland collages and the Middlesbrough collages, because we've also got an audio collage that goes with this as well, so that people are able to zoom and click. We've had to be quite careful with this, because although people are happy to disclose to clowns, it turns out that they'll tell a lot of things to people with a red nose. And they're happy to put stuff on the wall. We're not happy with it. So we're now working quite hard to kind of make it to get the sense of what's being said without making people identifiable. Anyway.
I know that we're looking at the collage just stepping through. So
yeah.
So how do we analyze this, or how do we interpret it?
So we're now working on analysis techniques for this in different ways. There are a number of thematic techniques the number of thematic analysis, which is very basic thematic analysis, that works quite well, and you come out with a very standard piece of analysis for that, which we're currently doing. There's also linguistic analysis as well, which is the frequency of words, the types of words that are used. That's another way to articulate it. There's an interesting difference between what's on the visual collage and what's on the audio collage, so that's also quite an interesting piece of comparison. Pictures aren't much use to us, but that's fine. It is actually a way of engaging with the pictures. Don't really tell us too much. There's more we could have done. In fact, we refined the pictures approach in the subsequent collages. What's also interesting here is whether we can use, and this is something that we're exploring with Sunderland, whether we can look at the phrasing and actually use that back into some of the portals that are being used, and whether, if we compare and contrast the quite technocratic language that's still in use, and whether we can use some of these phrasings, whether we get better responses. So that's where we are. But we're also working, talking with Newcastle Culture Labs, who helped us out a bit with the Sunderland one, to see whether there's some semiotic analysis as well that we can use here. But at the moment, for now, we're primarily thematic analysis, and then comparing and contrasting what comes up in the literature with what comes up on our collage and where there are differences.
I think it's a really nice progression to start off asking them about life in Middlesbrough, and then asking them, and then at the bottom saying, how do you form your personal internet identity? So here's my real life identity, and then here's my personal, and it's neat that you're
because
finding a
for
way
us,
how to
they're very much linked. But the question is how, and I mean that's a whole project. It would be a great digital personhood project. You know, it really would, because we scratch a little bit of the surface here, but certainly for Middlesbrough, for Sunderland, for many, not all, but for many of the people that we talk to, there is a progression. And whilst there might be some communication with people outside of their communities, the bulk is in their local space, and it's a form of community cohesion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. So, questions and comments? Anybody? Any thoughts? Has anyone used anything remotely like these methods that Lizzie has talked about in their research? Is this completely novel? Anyone?
Yes.
Casper.
So, Lizzie, I may have got the wrong impression, but I suppose from big picture, one thing surprising me about this project is if I was looking at this, I might want to take some of the subjects that you work with and sort of almost shake them by the shoulders and say, you don't realise how your privacy is in danger. Think about this risk. Think about this risk. Try and understand this situation that you'll put in online, and then see, as it were, once they've understood and penetrated a bit into the technology of the risk situation, how they responded to that.
So
it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be more about, as it were. I think there's something in the brochure about a project to monitor the behaviour of people who are at risk of offending, and ways in which they can communicate that it's all right, fine, they're not going to use that to spy on you, but maybe they are going to use that to spy on you.
No. That's okay. So it comes back to the value of the proposition. So I think there are 2 points here that are really important points. One is that there's an interesting point. We work with a volunteering group who had, of their own accord, set up a site talking about their issues and how they got help. And they were enormously disclosing. And I came with your point, which is, well, the issues and employment. And they looked at me blankly and said, but we're unlikely to get employment. So that was point number one. Okay, but what about, being identifiable? Yeah, well, the people, I'm likely to be in this space, and they already know these things about me. So it's an interesting perspective. So what I learned there was that the arguments that you shape, so this doesn't come out here, but that's obviously where the conversation goes, is what are the issues, who are the predators? So this is where loan sharks come up, drug dealers come up. What are the implications? And in fact, again, on the Pallium work, which is actually the one that you're talking about, these aren't ex-offenders, they're their community, the big reason that stopped online use is the concern about disclosure. So now we're working... Yeah, so
maybe it's a valid concern.
Exactly. So now we're working at how they can leverage online services. We're using quite a bit of... We've designed a lot of offline techniques that will work in coffee mornings. That will work, and we're then through with Proboscis. That will then be a vanilla toolkit that can then be used. But they have to identify themselves. You might work with them and promote that discussion, but get reflection on what are the issues, because what are the issues for my son going forward is different to his counterpart, and it's understanding what those differences are and where those pressures are. And also, really importantly, I think, Casper, which is something that we haven't really done in the security community up to now, is starting at first-based principles. What kit are you using and where does it come from? So one of the things in some of the communities I work in is the kit that's nicked. So we're starting from point, where does that kit come from? Who sets it up? Who has the passwords? What social network group are they part of? And these are all conversations that you have. And it's actually, in a way, a bigger trade-off, because it's really important to reach out. It's really important to communicate, because this is a potential route to help you move forward, but to do it in such a way that you don't become more vulnerable downstream. So what we're doing, this is where the game's really important. This is where the music video was a complete surprise. We were actually expecting a participatory documentary video, which they did, which didn't really work, but the music video worked really well in terms of getting discussion about what you disclose and what you don't disclose, and peer responses to that.
So I suppose what I found
Yeah.
in my time in Microsoft
Yeah.
was that the public relations people
Yeah.
told us that you couldn't talk about privacy, you always had to talk about just staying safe. And the thinking behind that was that people didn't understand technical security and they didn't understand information privacy for the reasons you think that we agree on.
Yeah, yeah.
But on the other hand, this Get Safe agenda seems to be very much about safe to use corporate or government services.
It doesn't go anywhere. Yeah.
So, I mean, if one actually wants to get genuine, beyond
Yeah.
user centricity, actually almost information self-determination,
Yes.
you have to get a technical agenda somewhere.
You do, and in fact, you can get the technical agenda, because you get the technical agenda through discussion. Because in fact, it turns out that a group of 9-year-olds that were developing collages remarkably good with privacy settings when they're running a homework club that they don't want teachers or family to know about, and this is actually how they were delivering homework. But they didn't see it as equally important so then you kind of push and probe. But what are you disclosing? Yeah, but I know, so I'm not going to say that online. I wouldn't. So also you see this as well and you could see that they were actually quite canny about what they disclosed. So for example, offenders. Use of Facebook. Well, do you disclose the fact that your brother's inside? No. Of course not. I talk about vanilla things, but then there's a very real issue about then if you're a prison support charity and you want to use that media, how are you going to use it? Because people aren't going to engage with that medium in that way. So we have to think about where you would disclose, how you would disclose.
What about more literally proactive measures, like using encrypted proxies, using encryption, and what that does and doesn't do for people?
So that then is the next stage, and that then is building up. And what the key there is training the gatekeepers. And that's really important. There's a lot of side-by-side. This is where I say non-users really come into the loop. So grandmothers have turned out really important in terms of thinking about issues and also conflict resolution. So Facebook spats are then resolved offline through Nana. But also grandmother has quite a big role to play in terms of how you behave, in terms of online etiquette. Equally, training gatekeepers, and this is something that happens so that then you do of UK Online Centre staff becomes really important. So I think it's a question of targeting your interventions, and we've written about that. Debbie's written about that quite a bit.
Develop a bit more.
Yeah, go on.
The UK is not, shall we say, an environment which has exactly encouraged use of privacy tools or encouraged a culture of privacy. No. Did you encounter, as it were, in the limitations, the brief you were given, resistance in official quarters to getting more technical, to getting more proactive?
So, what we discussed. This is a really interesting point, and we discussed initially what we encountered was a big resistance to having the conversation at all, a massive resistance, to the point where the ISG we have a lot of connections with service providers. They didn't want to talk to us. I've worked in industry for nearly 20 years. Didn't want to talk to us. But what it turned out was that was the method of engagement. When we turned up with digital sticky back plastic, and we went into, and we had a load of service providers prodding and poking, then there was a conversation around it. So it turns out that you've really got to give them a sort of almost an artifact proposition in order to get the conversation to move. Then the problem comes, not a resistance to talking about privacy, but what came up several times, bearing in mind I'm talking about public service delivery, is not knowing enough about your service user demographic that we really don't know. And when we started, people like myself knew about the technology, but we didn't really know that much about user practices. Now we find ourselves talking a lot to technology providers about what we found, and that then gets fed into thoughts about how the delivery of services takes place. Does that mean privacy in the way that we think about privacy solutions? That remains to be seen, but certainly the fact that to get people, I think the thing that where VOM's coming from, and that's where it got to in 3.5 years, is developing tools to develop the reflection that you're talking about, to actually have the conversation with yourself about what you disclose, what you don't disclose, whether you can trust the fact that other people trust that service. And so where we really saw a result was when we got people with the program, no, I don't want to go there. You've now raised the fact that this is going to be disclosed. And knowing that, no, I wouldn't use that service. I now want to go somewhere else. And we consider that to be quite a result because people had made a choice. Does that make sense? So that's actually where we went to.
It's a sad reflection, I guess, on my own experience in Microsoft, where I guess it reached a point about 7 or 8 years ago where, having talked to some of the marketing people, the design people, I found that they understood intuitively, we absolutely do not want to tell users to alert them to these sorts of risks because they won't use the service. And I thought, well, is that it then? You know? And then I had all the struggles after that to take it further, but not really successfully.
But I think in the pub, so I think this is an interesting point. When we first started on this, there was a lot of naysayers because they said, well, the economic argument, this is the economic argument. Well, that was really interesting. We kind of went on regardless. We thought, well, stuff that. We really can't play that game. This is not where we're going. Interestingly, the economic argument has then formed around what we've done. And here the counter argument comes, we have to deliver online services. If we don't get, so some of the work that we've done has shown that lack of trust means lack of engagement, lack of genuine engagement, which is an issue for certain types of services. So if you don't get that genuine engagement, actually it's going to cost you money downstream because then you've got to pick up the pieces. So now the economic argument forms back the other way, that working in particular areas, actually it's potentially, it would be interesting to try it out because it might be more cost effective for us because our offline services otherwise have to pick up the pieces.
Maria?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I just thought, I think a problem in privacy awareness is that we function in void at the experiential level. We don't feel consequences, possible negative consequences of violations. How did you address that?
Okay, this is where, as I say, with the probe start to get a result, is that by looking and experiencing where the information might go, there became a reaction that said, well, actually, maybe that's okay, or maybe it's not okay. So for us, it was visioning visualizing where that information might go, and the control you might go, and what would happen, and getting that in a way that was actually condensed and on an image.
In terms of interesting and evoking scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. So with the Safe at Last work, that's exactly what happens. It's about values. It's about value handling, and then you decide whether or not what you're going to disclose and how you're going to disclose it. Because the thing in the Safe at Last scenario that they have to make clear is that there are times when they're going to have to contact third parties. They're going to have to contact. So here you are. You're a child at risk. You phone up, you say, I've run away from home, here are my issues, and then the person at Safe at Last has to make a choice as to whether they're going to contact other agencies or whether they're going to deal with it themselves, right? So the important point here is to then decide how you articulate that, because it isn't actually a policy, it is a value judgment. And then it's how you visualize that so that people can see it and interpret it in a moment of crisis. You know, that you don't sort of phone up in a calm or email in a calm and collected manner. You're there at a point of crisis. So it's about finding visualizations that show you what might happen to your data, and then we find that's interesting because people might change the choice paths that they would otherwise make.
So are there any limitations in the techniques used?
Yes, there are limitations. The clear limitation is in terms of getting the right level of segmentation. That's one thing. Another limitation is how to adapt it for different levels of visual literacy. There's another limitation, which is a really important limitation. If you don't think you can change a situation, are you necessarily going to invest the time to look at what happens with your information? So a level of awareness, you've got to be at a level ready to receive awareness. So for example, if you don't think that you can change the outcome of what's going to happen, you might just go ahead and do it anyway. And that's a really important point, which is where the social interventions matter, is to get you to think about where you might or might not influence outcomes, the types of choices you might have, At that point, online interventions become a lot more useful.
Yeah.
Yep. I just had a question a bit about, say, the kind of preferences or concerns that people had, and I guess a takeaway for technologists. So just a bit of background. So we're sort of working in like sort of assisted living, future healthcare types of things. And what we found in looking at user concerns or people's concerns, it was usually they kind of trusted their doctors, whatever, but they didn't want to know, they didn't want their wife to know when they're in the pub, but otherwise any other like location information is type fine. So how we sort of like dealt with this, we could find quite often you could have a set of sort of, you know, templates which would generally apply to people, and then, you know, you talk to them, try and get some concerns, and you tweak them for particular scenarios. And that works quite well in healthcare because everyone sort of trusts their doctors and that sort of thing. So I guess the question was, did you see any of these sort of preferences which come out for other services? Would sort of a templating approach type of apply in other scenarios for other services and so forth? Where there isn't as much trust with the service, you just kind of want to use it rather than, you know, that kind of Hippocratic oath sort of.
Right. So that's really interesting. When you're dealing with local councils, of course, people have views on the local council, and there are various levels of confidence going on. There's trust and confidence in the local council, trust and confidence in the technology, there's trust and confidence in the service itself, and these are all factors, and in your own ability to drive. So there are typically four points that actually come together. And what we found when we did the second generation of probes was that we learned quite a lot about how you might adjust the awareness tools to deal with different levels of confidence and trust. So whether it's about the technology, whether it's about the service provider, whether it's about the service itself, whether it's about your own ability. So templating, I think, and this is something that VOAM didn't get as far as, because 3.5 years isn't enough, but where it would be an interesting place to follow on from would be to look at personalisation. Not personalisation in terms of how to make things whizzier or quicker, but personalisation in terms of how you adjust for different levels of confidence in those four elements.
Because I think also what could be interesting if you looked at sort of the social aspect, you know, like everyone in a certain community might have very similar preferences to that in a different community or a different network structure.
Although actually when we pushed with the participatory approach, that didn't emerge. People that you almost could see the same spectrum that you see at the broad level when you really, which is where segmentation is so important, and we would find people with different levels of standpoints. So I think it would be, I don't think it would be a result to do it on a sectoral deployment level, but I think to find ways in which, and games is where gamification becomes very interesting, to find ways to identify where your confidence levels are and adjust for that, and also find ways to keep checking, because again, that's going to evolve. The other thing that also comes into this, which I think is really, really important in the type of demographic that we predominantly worked in for the last 18 months, is understanding the role of the social proxy, the individual who is helping, assisting, and particularly for assisted living as well. That's another area. And your relationship with that proxy is a really important point that again, we know a little bit about from VOAM, but is another thing on the end that I think needs to be explored. And certainly if you're going to deliver services right the way across a society, you've really got to understand how that social proxying works. And you're not going to eradicate it. This is, I guess, a point that Casper's raising. You know, you're not going to change that behaviour. It is how you embrace that behaviour and design services accordingly.
Any more questions? Yeah. Nope. Okay. Well, thank you again, Lizzie. That was wonderful. And